I thought of something this morning. Oh no, this is so pathetic. I'm going to organize it in the work as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we're just going to wait a few more minutes.
Hello.
Hi, Jill. It's Alexis. How are you?
Oh, good. I'm very happy to be talking to you.
I'm happy as well.
Good.
Hey Jill, it's Mary. It looks like we have quite a few people who have joined.
Great.
Pretty full house, so thanks everybody for coming. I think that Alexis is the host right now, so she can transfer host duties to you so you can share your screen.
Or we could take
Well, all I'm going to do is share my screen, right? I'm not going to manage participants.
Yes. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
So can I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, please do. Great. You can see it.
Okay. Are we good?
Looks great.
Is Rebecca on?
Hi, Jill. I'm on.
Good. Good morning. So tell me when you think we're ready to begin.
Alexis, Mary, do we have a quorum, or are we still waiting for a few more people?
I think we should get started.
Okay.
Rebecca, do you want me to just jump right in?
That sounds great.
Okay, and then we'll throw it over to you when appropriate.
Okay. Thanks, Jill.
So welcome everybody to our webinar on human-centered design activities and research ethics. This is a joint activity by myself, Jill Schumann, and Rebecca Firestone. And we have a ton to cover in this very ambitious webinar. So I'm going to fly. And if there are specific topics that you want to go more in depth on, I hope that you can reach out to the A360 folks at PSI to see how we can do that for you. I'm hoping to leave some time for questions at the end. And if you have burning questions along the way, please feel free to ask. So what are we doing in this webinar? We hope to answer 5 questions. They are: why is research ethics important to human-centered design activities? What are the basic concepts of research ethics? What is PSI policy on human subject protection? How do you decide if something really is human subject research? And because I know many of you are in the process right now of planning for the boot camp, what happens if something changes when I'm implementing an approved protocol? We'll start that topic, and it's something that you can go deeper into hopefully at the boot camp itself. So moving right along, I am going to throw it over to Rebecca, who's going to talk about why research ethics is important in human-centered design.
All right. Thanks, Jill. So this is something I think this is an issue we've been sort of touching on in various conversations over the course of the A360 inception, and as we're planning for research activities to be able to engage with the adolescents that we're seeking to serve in this project. And so we wanted to just touch on this briefly in a kind of a high level way. So clearly we're all here because we care about improving the health of the people that we serve. And part of that means treating people ethically, treating the people that we serve ethically and fairly. Human-centered design requires a lot of engagement with people, the people that we're seeking to serve, and an understanding and insights into who they are as people. So getting that kind of information about what people think, what they feel, what's their context, what are they doing that in a systematic way is a research activity. And it's about doing it in a systematic way that it's a research, that this is often considered to be research because we're trying to learn something and we've got some objectives that we're trying to specifically learn about by talking to people. Those research activities may often not have an actual direct benefit for the participants. So we want to go talk to people and learn something about their lives, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting anything out of the interaction. They're giving us their time and their opinions because they're trying to help us to understand them. But we have to understand that they may not get anything out of that interaction directly, and in fact, we may actually be putting them at risk by talking with them particularly about talking about the potentially sensitive subjects or even just the process of engaging with them. So if we're not presenting direct benefits to them of that engagement and we may be putting them at risk, we want to make sure that we're actually minimizing the risks when people are engaging with us in research activities. We also know that our donors really care about research ethics and around the regulatory requirements around research ethics. So we have specific language in our contracts with Gates and with SIF where they want to know that we are taking appropriate protections around the protection of human subjects in research. And certainly other donors involved in human-centered design are also concerned about those research ethics. And lastly, we know that the global health community cares about research ethics. People working in global health will often ask about, what kind of protections did you take when you were conducting a research activity. So we will be asked about this as we share information from this project. Mm-hmm. A final issue is that there's an organizational risk mitigation approach to human subjects protections, where we want to make sure that our organizations are not put at risk because of the activities that we conduct. There are a certain number of of worst case scenarios that can happen when other organizations working in our space haven't necessarily always gone through the process of ensuring protections, and it can actually lead to very real consequences for the organizations who work in our space. So we just want to make sure that all of the organizations within this consortium are protected as we go about learning and engaging with the people that we seek to engage with on this project. So next slide. And then I'm going to hand it back over to you, Jill.
Okay, so the good thing to know is that there is a structure in place around how do we make sure that we are designing our research to minimize risks, and that includes protections for our subjects. It's not just some vague thought about how do we do well and do good for our participants. There are very concrete steps to take. And these concrete steps are organized around 3 key principles in human subject protections. And these are respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. These 3 principles are codified in the Belmont Report, which was written in the early 70s as a reaction to the Tuskegee syphilis trials. And it is based, and the regulations that we use today are based on the concepts in the Belmont Report. So these are very real and very living documents. Each one of these concepts is probably a day-long webinar in itself. So I'm going to go through some basic definitions and some basic ways these are brought to life in real research protocols. But there's no way I can do them justice here. So if you have taken the city training or want to take the city training, that's a great place to go to get more information about each one of these concepts. So, broad overview, respect for persons. What does that mean? It means that we respect the autonomy of each one of our participants to make their own decisions, to decide, to be able to understand the risks and benefits that are presented to them, and to weigh for themselves whether the benefits outweigh the risks and whether they should participate or not just in the study as a whole, but in answering specific questions. We stress very much the voluntary nature of all of our research. Participants are always free to opt out at any time, and that includes skipping questions for whatever reason. And all of those opting out or skipping questions come without any consequences to them. It is up to them to decide. But not everyone is capable of making these decisions for themselves, and for groups that aren't capable of doing so, we need to put special protections in place. And people might not be capable because of their age, because of their mental capacity, because of the environment that they live and work in, which might be potentially coercive. And we need to identify all of those things up front. And in our protocols, we need to identify them, and we need to find ways to address them. And so the application of the respect for persons concept, the application in research is mostly seen through the informed consent. And it is why informed consent is so important, and that there are specific things that must be in there that you must tell subjects about their participation. But it is also codified in respect for their privacy during data collection and even after data collection, especially if they're giving identifying information. And that we do with their data what we said we would do in the informed consent. Beneficence means that we strive to do no harm and that we minimize any risks to subjects. And its application in research is, we maximize benefits and minimize harms. And any research that an IRB determines not to have a favorable risk-benefit ratio will not be approved. So that is something that researchers need to be trained to both identify these risks and then have a plan and articulate a plan for reducing them. And I have to say, as chair of the REB, this is where we spend most of our time. Researchers have a very hard time putting down on paper what the possible risks are. And I believe they know it. I mean, most of our researchers are local. They know their environments extremely well. But the concept of taking what's in their head and putting it down on paper and then a plan to address it is a constant challenge. The final precept is justice, which means an equitable distribution of the benefits and burdens of research. And that often relates to how you recruit participants into your research study or into your activity. And it means that we can't always go to the same group for our data. It might be convenient because they're in the neighborhood next door to our office, so we'll just run down there again. That is an unfair distribution of the burden of research. Any sample that is really for convenience is also something that should be looked at through the justice criteria. Are we taking as wide a view as we possibly can in this research while still respecting the objective of the research and spreading these benefits and burdens of research as far as we can, and taking a broad view of the population that we're studying. So there you have the Belmont report in 5 seconds or less. It's fascinating reading. I would recommend reading the Belmont report. It is only 7 pages long, and it's a really good insight into how we can do these things and do them in a very practical way. So moving on to PSI policy on human subject protections. We follow the US government regs for human subject protections, and we follow them regardless of the donor. And that is because we have so many different donors. There are European regs, which are similar to the US government regs. Different countries might have different regs as well. And it would just be a confusing mess if we tried to have different standards for each of the studies that we implemented. The US government regs are broad enough and similar enough to others, and in some cases a little bit more strict, so that at least we know we are covering our bases when we use these regulations. The research, non-research determination at PSI is typically made by our regional researchers or the PI. The REB can be brought in to help if you need help. We have a form that you can fill out. Sometimes that form is enough to help you go through the steps of that determination, and you might not need our help. Or if you still want it, you can send in that form and then we can make the determination for you. It is our policy that human subject research must be reviewed by an IRB that is registered with the US government, and you can go online and find out whether an IRB is registered or not. It does not mean that PSI has to review every single study. We are happy to seed review as long as there's an authorization agreement in place. And this is another place where there's a lot of confusion, because we have a lot of PSI researchers who say, well, you know, on my local board, we thought it was human subject research. We gave it to the local board. They approved it. What's the problem? The problem is that they never knew that they were approving it for PSI and covering PSI's review. So we need a formal document that says PSI is not reviewing this. PSI's REB is not reviewing this, and we are transferring our review to you, the local board, and both parties sign, and it's very clear. So that's an important piece of seeding review. And seeding review it can go in both directions. People can seed to us, organizations can seed to us, as UC Berkeley has done in A360, instead of them reviewing and us reviewing, which would be, oh my God, a third board involved in your formative research. UC Berkeley seeded to PSI's REB. We have reviewed both for our role and UC Berkeley's role, and we knew when we reviewed it that we were doing that. And, but we could also, in other studies and in many studies, we seed to local boards and have authorization agreements in place. And there are benefits to doing that for the country team as well as for our REB. And if it's not determined to be research, there's still work to do. Your justification for determining it to be non-human subjects research must be documented and filed with study documents in case there are ever any questions later on about how that decision was made. And it's really important that this gets written down and filed in a way that people later on, many times totally different people, can find those. And this is something that must be done at the country level, because PSI's REB doesn't see most of those determinations of non-research. So that should happen, that filing and documentation should happen with research documents at the country level. So that's our policy. So how do you determine if something is human subject research or not? Well, it all goes back to the regs. And this is where things get a little dry, but it's critical to understand and to be able to walk through this definition whenever you are making a determination or justifying a determination. You have to go back to the regulatory definitions of human subject and research. And if you meet the definitions of both of those things, then you have human subjects research on your hands, and it must be reviewed by an IRB. So the regulatory definition of human subject is a living individual about whom an investigator conducting research obtains either data through intervention or interaction with the individual, or identifiable private information. So I've put in italics here the pieces of the definitions that I think are critical and that we really use most often on the REB when we're trying to figure this out. About whom is really critical to the human subject determination. Are we asking people about themselves, or are we asking them about something more general, something that is, you know, what do people in general think about XYZ? Or are we asking, what do you think about? Or are we asking something that's not about them? It might be about their retail outlet. how much stock do you have on hand of X product? How much do you sell in a month? Is that about the retailer? In many cases, we've decided that doesn't, those retail outlet activities don't meet the about whom criteria. The other thing that I've put in italics is that you either need to meet number 1 or number 2 in this definition. You don't need to meet both. So if you are having any interaction with an individual, that means you are involving human subjects in your activity, as long as you meet the about whom, right? Or if you're not having an interaction, but you're looking at identifiable private information, and this really comes into play when you're looking at MIS data or clinic data, you're not talking to that individual, but many times you are looking at their name, their address, their cell phone number, things like that. And so you might not be interacting with someone, but if you have access to identifiable private information about that person, then that meets the definition of human subject. So believe it or not, the human subject determination I find to be quite easy. In research with PSI, in studies, I should say, with PSI, that one is usually the easier one. The more complicated one is the definition of research, which is defined in the regs as a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. And the 2 biggies here that I've italicized are designed and generalizable knowledge. So you always need to think about what you want to do with the outputs of your research. Why are you doing this? For what end goal? And if that end goal includes contributing in some way to generalizable knowledge, you are involved in research. So what is generalizable knowledge? I've put some definitions down that different people have that I've found over the years that I think might be helpful. The first one is it's just new information that can be useful for understanding other populations that are similar to the one we're studying. So, we are just conducting research in this area in, Benin, but this information is going to be really helpful for anyone who's studying this type of population somewhere else. Or from UC Irvine, results that are used to draw general conclusions, inform policy, or generalized findings beyond a single individual or an internal program. I find this helpful because sometimes PSI collects data and really all they want to do is feed it to the marketing plan and that's it. And that to me can be considered an internal use of this data, which is very different from generalizable knowledge. Okay. However, once you start saying that this is to inform policy, that is to draw more general conclusions about a type of population, then you start getting into research. And this definition from CDC is actually referred to a lot, or different pieces of it are at least. And that's new information that has relevance beyond the population or program from which it was collected, or information that's added to the scientific literature. Knowledge that can be generalized is collected under systematic procedures that reduce bias and which allow the knowledge to be applied to populations and settings different from the ones from which it was collected. So you get the idea that in generalizable, we are trying to do something bigger than simply feed it back to our program and use it in our program. So again, the way that you determine whether or not something needs review is to go back to the definition of human subjects and research. And I'm going to skip the examples. And you can't base your determination on the risk level of your research, which I think is a shame. I think it is counterintuitive that risk is not involved in the determination, but these are the regs we have. You can't base a determination based on whether or not your protocol is ready to go to an IRB or not, or how busy you are and how much pressure a donor is putting on you, or the time that IRBs require. And I know that you are all intimately involved with how much time that takes, or even the type of methodology or the data source. None of that is part, as you have seen, of the definitions of human subjects or research. So it is the only way to determine this. It is in the regs that these are the definitions, and this is how a determination is made. And I'm going to breathe, and we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about once you have your approved protocol, we're going to imagine for a second that it's come out of the Ethiopia IRB, all looks good, no changes required. You have one protocol, the same protocol approved by PSI and Ethiopia, and you're ready to go into boot camp. What happens if you want to change something? Well, first of all, the fact that you have an approved protocol means that you've moved now into this next phase of REB oversight. Obviously, our oversight begins with the initial submission. It continues through implementation and can even extend through analysis, especially if you're dealing with identifiable information in the analysis stage. So as part of your submission, your PIs signed that they would implement the study as presented in the materials that were approved by the REB. And those materials give you a specific roadmap, right? The things that you can do during this study. And any deviation from this roadmap requires some communication with us. So there are two big times to contact the REB during implementation of a study. One is if you want to change something, we call those modifications, or if there is a reportable event, and that is anything unexpected happens during implementation. And I'm only going to talk about mods now because I think that's all we have time for, but hopefully you guys can get into reportable events in the boot camp itself. So modifications, according to our policies and procedures, there are 3 types of mods. They're called admin changes, minor, or major changes. An admin change doesn't require submission to the REB. These are small things that could include reformatting your questionnaire. You could change around the order of questions in a data collection document. You can correct spelling or revise the wording as long as you're not changing the meaning, or adding questions related to exposure to PSI messages or programs. As long as you already had some questions of that topic in there, you can add to that without coming back to the REB. So if you want to do something other than those types of things, modifications then get separated into minor and major. Minor changes are those that don't increase risks to participants. They do not change the risk profile of the study. And those require submission to the REB, but we review them on an expedited basis. So we review them basically as soon as they come in and on a rolling basis. Major changes are those that significantly increase risk to participants, and those need to go to the full board. So what are some examples of modifications that should be submitted to the REB? Significant changes in the number of participants. If you change your inclusion criteria, go back to your study design. What was your inclusion and exclusion criteria? Are you going for a new group of subjects that's not in that inclusion criteria? That is a modification. If you are recruiting subjects from new catchment areas that were not in your original design, that also requires a mod. If you want to add a new topic, something comes up and you didn't foresee it in your original protocol, but you really want to, drill down into that, you need to come back to us. New recruitment methods. What if you get to the field and find out the recruitment methods that you had planned aren't getting you the numbers of people you want or the types of people you want, and you're dreaming up some new recruitment method? That requires a mod. If you want to collect data in a different way than what was explained in your protocol, again, a mod is needed. And clearly any changes to the informed consent process requires a mod, and changes in the PI leading the study would obviously need a mod as well. So the big thing here is that modifications have to be reviewed and approved by the IRB before you can implement them. You can't fire off a request for a mod to the REB and then start making that change, because technically you are implementing something that is not in your approved protocol. You need to get an approval from the REB, and at that point, your protocol has been changed to include that, so now you can go ahead and implement that change. That's critically important, because otherwise you would be considered non-compliant because you weren't implementing your study as it was described in the approved documents. So, as I said, you don't want to be found to be non-compliant, and that's one consequence of not following an approved study design or getting a mod approval before you implement a change. But it can also increase risk to subjects if you go out there and do something that hasn't been approved. And one of the consequences of non-compliance can be that you can't use the data from this new data collection technique that you devised because it wasn't part of the original protocol. And then you've just wasted your time, and you've wasted the time of your participants, which is not respect for persons. So you want to avoid all of that. The good news is that the REB is always open. No question is too big or too small. You can give us a heads up. You can say, this is when we're going into the boot camp. This is when we're going to be collecting data in the field, so that we can kind of be on standby for you guys, and that we can be ready to respond quickly if need be. We totally understand the pressures you're under. I understand them maybe more than than Kelly does, just because of my brief time working with A360. I know you guys want to get out there and do this, and we really want to be able to be responsive to you and help you out as much as we can. And to the extent that we can have this ongoing conversation while you're at the boot camp or in data collection, I think that will help. And that's it. Thank you and good luck. And I am going to breathe. And you guys can think about questions.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks, Jill. That was great. Do we have questions from anyone on the line?
Yeah, I have this question about the young researchers. Do they have to do the city course online? Because they're going to participate in the gathering data.
Jill, I can take that. This is Rebecca. And the PSI guidance, or the REB guidance on who has to do the city training, is that anyone who's a named investigator on a protocol that's submitted to the Research Ethics Board needs to show that they have completed that training. So for the youth researchers, it's not required that they take that training. That said, we want to make sure that the youth researchers have a background on protecting the participants in the research, and we will be spending time in the boot camp, both the boot camp for the research in Ethiopia, as well as the boot camp training in Nigeria, going through ethical procedures to make sure that anyone who's collecting data knows how to do it in an ethical way.
Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So if there are connectivity issues and people have a hard time getting into the city training, let us know. Other questions?
Yeah. Hey, Jill. Thanks very much for the presentation. This is Richard.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Jill, we received approval from PSI IRB on Ethiopia, and we made a second submission to the Ethiopia local IRB.
Mm-hmm.
Received lots of comments yesterday. Some of the comments require that we change the structure of the protocol. Some of they are raising serious concerns around why are we working with young people, and why are we working with unmarried. So we are working on a response, but there are going to be significant changes in the in the protocol. Do
Mm-hmm.
you foresee that? I mean, looks like this is going to be beyond administrative. Are we not likely to go through another round of IRB back at PSI?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, you can't avoid that. And even prior to your information about what the Ethiopia IRB is asking for, I mean, we always knew that they would ask for something, right? And that something would need to be changed. And because when you go into implementation, you can only be working off of one final document. You cannot have a PSI approved and an Ethiopia approved. It should be all the same thing. So we always knew there would be a process after approval by the local IRB to go back to PSI and do some kind of modification. Okay?
Yeah.
So that will totally be necessary. Now, my experience in the past, and also there are parts of the regs, I mean, we cannot supersede local laws on these, research issues, right? And we defer a lot to a local board. And so we're not going to get into a theoretical discussion with, the local board about, unmarried versus married, et cetera. Those aren't the types of things that we get in, that we are going to be looking at. We look at big picture issues. When you come back with a mod, we want to know if the changes that you have been asked to make are increasing risk to subjects. That's huge to us, okay? Now, most of these IRBs, I mean, they know their stuff, and, they have reasons for asking what they're asking, but it's not always related to risk. And so hopefully the process of going through a mod at PSI can be easier than the initial submission, because we will be very flexible, except where we think harm might occur. Having said that, if you need our help as you are responding, we are happy to give it. And Richard, you and I can have a conversation offline. Kelly's on vacation right now. I don't know your time frame for getting these in, but if there's any way I can help or I can get Kelly involved, we can do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jill, we've got a question that's come in from the SFH team on chat, which is about how long the approval of a modification might take. I think the concern is that researchers may already be in the field.
Yeah.
The modification is being submitted.
Yeah, you know what? If you give us the heads up about when you're in the field, we will do our best, and even give us a heads up that you think it might be a mod. Just shoot us an email, and we can respond very quickly. I'm assuming Kelly's not on vacation, right? And you would know that if you gave us the heads up about your dates, then you would know whether Kelly's around, because everything goes through her. And because we've never had a modification that required full board review. It hasn't happened on the PSI's REB, and I've been with it since it started. So those are expedited, and they can, as long as we understand what you are changing. So make sure you're explaining things to us. Treat us like we know nothing. Give us all the information you can, spell it out very clearly. Those can be handled in a matter of days.
Great. We've got another question that's coming in from Tony from the SFH team in Nigeria. Would it be advisable to get local board approval first before submitting to the PSI board?
Well, first of all, because UCB Berkeley has ceded to PSI's REB, you can't do the local board first, because you would want to be working with a protocol that has been approved for both UCB and PSI. So I think that would be difficult. However, even before the whole UCB issue came up, we had determined that it would still be faster to start with the PSI REB, because we are normally faster than local boards. And local boards have a bigger portfolio that they have to review than we do. And wherever you start, you always have to go back to that original board for a mod because of the changes that the other board will require. I mean, we can just take it for granted that they're going to ask for some type of change, right? That means you still have to go back to the original board. And we always believe that our mod processing would be much faster than a local board. So I think that you would save time in getting PSI's approval, then going to the local board, getting their approval, and then submitting a mod that can be approved in a matter of days from the PSI REB. I hope that makes sense. It's a little confusing, but I hope that was clear.
Thanks, Jill. That is to confirm that the advice that the A360 core team has been giving to countries has been to go to the PSI board first, because PSI is the board of record for contractual reasons for this project, and go seek the PSI approval first and then take that protocol to the local boards that are reviewing. And then come back to the PSI board for modification afterwards.
Right.
Do we have other questions, either through chat or someone who wants to hop in? Well, then I've got a question for you, Jill.
Okay.
This is about some of the administrative and the monitoring information that's going to come up, and sort of thinking a couple steps down the road and what kinds of information Adolescence 360 is going to be collecting. So we know that the Adolescence 360 teams in all of the countries are going to want to spend a certain amount of time seeking feedback from adolescents, and this could look this could take shape in a number of ways. It could be going out and asking them, what do you think about this prototype that we're trying out here with you right now? It could be using SMS cell phone messaging and talking to girls that way and asking them to send text messages to us. And a lot of that will be about refining the prototypes that are being developed and seeking to get feedback on if we think our prototypes are going in the right direction. Because that's part of the human-centered design process. So are there points in that process where you would have guidance about thinking through when that information gathering process might end up becoming something that looks like research with human subjects and thus needs these particular protections?
Right. I think you can probably guess what I'm going to say, which is that you have to go back to the definitions of human subject and research. And in the examples that you gave, you can be pretty clear you're having some type of interaction with a human subject. And I would ask whether or not you are asking about whom type questions, right? And in the examples that you gave, it sounded like you were. But you don't always have to be, right? But so let's say, just for the sake of argument, that you have determined that human subjects are involved. Then you go to the definition of research and you ask yourself, what are you going to do with this data, right? And are you contributing to generalizable knowledge? If you are looking for reactions to some type of prototype, then it doesn't matter whether it's via SMS or whatever, because really your data collection method doesn't matter to the determination. If you are looking for some reactions to a prototype, and all you are going to do then is go change that prototype, and then, go forward with the prototyping process, that one could argue, and I never give definitive answers without seeing a whole thing written down in a protocol, but one could argue that might not be contributing to generalizable knowledge. However, if you want to share this information that you're getting back for these reactions to these protocols, because you think the information that you're getting from these girls will be interesting to other people who are working with adolescent girls in other countries, then you're moving into generalizable territory. So those are the big things to think about. So in general, go back to the definitions and look at what I've got in italics and ask yourself those questions.
Fantastic. Does anyone have questions or comments on
Yes, I have a question related to that, Jill.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's a follow-on question, and I think it's a central question to A360. We are going to have a lot of pilots, and we shall, like you say, be getting feedback on the pilots.
Mm-hmm.
But we shall be getting this feedback from adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
We have developed an evaluation standard
Mm-hmm.
going to help us to know whether our protocols are good.
Mm-hmm.
And much of the questions in there are not about whom, but they are about the protocol. And however, A360 by design is a learning project which is designed to disseminate this knowledge, but specifically to share the solutions that we come up with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that is what you want to call knowledge, but we want to share the solutions that we come up with and demonstrate to the world that these solutions are effective.
Mm-hmm.
My question for your advice is that the design standard which we have come up with, within it there is a section on ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Does this design standard require IRB approval?
We don't. I mean, we've never reviewed anything like a design standards, right? We would need to frame it as some type of data collection activity, right? And then we would need to first determine whether it met the definitions of human subject and research. Okay, so those, and you guys are the ones that start making that determination, right? And so you need to look at the different stages of your data collection for the different stages of the project and go through that process, okay? And figure out at what points you think IRB review is necessary because it meets human subjects, the human subject research definitions or not. I don't know how much more I can help you there. Rebecca, can you jump in?
I think that's just to add on that I think it would be hard for any IRB to review like an open-ended methodology, and they would want to understand who are you collecting the information from, how many people are you talking to, in order to assess what the level of potential risk is and what the risk-benefit ratio is.
Mm-hmm.
So what's in the design standards, I think there's probably some checks that need to be made as the teams get closer to using those design standards to figure out like how are those questions being asked, what information is needed in order to assess the design standards, and for what purpose is the information collected going to be used. And if it's just to answer questions on the design standards in order to improve a prototype, then that is probably going to be program improvement data and would not need to be, wouldn't determine to be research with human subjects.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that the information shouldn't be collected. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be thinking about the ethics of how you collect that information. Even if it's using it for improving the prototypes, we still want to make sure that we're protecting the privacy and the confidentiality of the people that we're talking to, and that we're giving them a chance to make an informed decision about whether or not to share information with us.
Right.
Are there questions or clarifications about that? Because we've got another question that's come in from chat. Okay, I'm going to read this out, Jill, for you. This is from Tony. And it says, will it be possible to interview a girl or girls through telephone or any social media platform who traveled out of the community during a community interview, or should you stick to only face-to-face interviews?
What did you say in your protocol? That's the answer. I mean, if you have included in your protocol the idea of telephone or some other method of interacting with your participants, and you specified what those methods were, then, and that protocol got approved, then yes, you can go ahead and do that. If that is a new way of interacting with your participants that was not foreseen in your protocol, then that requires a modification. Did I understand that question correctly?
I think so.
Okay.
But Team SFH, if that's not answering your question, please let us know either by chat or by voice.
No, it does. It does. When we get to the field, if we require the modification, then we'll let you know as earlier indicated.
Great. Thank you, Fatima.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one more question. Jill, we are planning to do some research work in Tanzania, and right now the Ethical Review Board has had its validity with the US government expire.
Right.
And we are worried that maybe by the time our protocol is ready, they won't have renewed.
Mm-hmm.
We intend to submit to PSI Review Board first.
Okay.
Will that suffice?
Will that suffice? It will suffice for complying with PSI's policy. If there is a rule in Tanzania that you must have local review of your research activities, then you might have to still go through the local board in Tanzania. You need to figure out what the regs are in Tanzania about research review. And you need to cover both. You need to make sure you have covered PSI policy, which you will do if you go through our IRB, because we can't cede to Tanzania because they are not currently registered with the USG. So once you get so I would, you can do it the same way as you're doing with the formative research with Ethiopia, and then you can go to the Tanzania board. It's a separate review, but at least you're working off of something that's been approved by PSI. If they require any changes, then you can do a mod to PSI and you're good to go.
Hi, so it sounds like we're going to need to do reviews at both places.
Right. Yeah, it would be great. I know that this Tanzania issue has been going on for a while, but ideally they would get their registration to be active again. I don't know what the issue is, but if they become active, that really changes the scenario. And in theory, we could cede to them, but that also depends on UC Berkeley's role in this, and I don't know whether they have a role. But if they're ceding to us, then we would still need a review.
Hi, this is Jill. Thank you so much for this. This is Trish from IDEO.org. I have a question. This may be a longer conversation, so I'm happy to take it offline. But the idea of program improvement versus generalizable knowledge can be such a fuzzy space because you may go in thinking you are just doing program improvement, but then you learn something that would be really good for the generalizable public. How do you approach that kind of process? If you are, how would you approach that?
Well, first of all, I would say that it is a judgment call, that everything we do in the REB is gray and not black and white. And I think that you are responsible for thinking through everything as much as you can, the types of issues that you are likely to come up with in a protocol or in an activity, right? and to try to address those and to see whether or not, how likely it would be that you could come up with something totally unexpected. And to the extent that you can deal with those things up front, and that might mean going through an IRB, it might mean what types of issues you are going to not go into right now, but leave for later because it wasn't, because that is a different type of research, because that becomes research and isn't program improvement. That is also something you might want to think about, kind of separating things out. I agree that it's not an easy determination up front, but I also know in the majority of studies we've looked at the REB, there are enough people on the ground who know this subject, that you're studying, that can help you determine how likely it would be that you're going to move from kind of just an internal exercise to a global sharing exercise. And you really want to take time up front to have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems as, like Richard was saying, this is meant to be something that's scalable as far as something that teams could do themselves. And I think the question that I'd have for the team maybe as we move forward is, those kind of, this approach could be used just for program improvement. And then as people learn and share together, then a bigger body of knowledge might be collected, but really they're just trying to improve their own space at the beginning. But I'll stop there because it's a bigger conversation. But thank you for all your information today. It was really helpful.
I would say that A360 is really different, and I think it's what is making your research, non-research determination so difficult is that you have this objective of sharing your knowledge, right? And you could take another program doing similar activities on the ground, and it could be considered non-research, right?
Right.
But because you have this overarching activity about, we are going to change the way services are supplied to adolescent girls, and the minute you start talking about, like, this is not just about Ethiopia's program, this is like worldwide, you really start, you really start involving people in human subject research. And that is what makes this project so tough with the determinations. So you've hit the nail on the head.
Great. I want to just read out a chat just so everyone can see this, is that Brett has chimed in from Tanzania that I'm not sure if Team Tanzania is on the line here or not, but that the local regulations are local practice is to submit to NIMR, which is the Tanzanian board, as well as, and we'll likely need to submit to PSI as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Knowing what I know about Tanzania, yeah. So it looks like you'll be doing a similar process to Ethiopia and Nigeria.
Yeah. We've got time for one or two more final comments or questions. Brett is coming in. Brett, thank you. Brett's saying his audio doesn't work. Is that Tanzanian law has some special concerns around using data collected in Tanzania outside of Tanzania.
Yep.
And procedures have to be shaped to reflect that particular concern.
Yeah. I think Tanzania is very well known for that. And so, and like I said, there's nothing that we can do. We cannot supersede local law. So you would need to just write that into your protocol, and we just take it into account as part of our review.
Great. Well, so we're just at time. So thanks everyone who has been on this webinar. If there are more comments and questions that you have about how to make a research determination or what happens with modifications, we can certainly talk about those over Slack and or email with any of the partners in the consortium. There is another element about reportable events that we haven't talked about in any detail on this webinar for the interest of time, which is about what happens if you're in the field doing data collection and something happens that's not in line with the protocol and how to handle that.
Right.
And Jill and I discussed beforehand whether we had time for that, and we decided that we would want to flag that as a topic that we get into during the boot camps, but not a subject for today's conversation. So you'll see more on that subject when we're going in Ethiopia with data collection.
And the REB has already done some thinking for A360 around what reportable events might look like, similar to kind of what the list I shared with you about mods. So there's already some information that we have that you guys can share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can get that out, but we'll follow up with Risha and around the planning of the boot camps.
Okay.
So, all right. We're at time, so thanks everyone. And stay tuned for the next webinar, which is going to be, you'll be getting invites to.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Thank you
thanks
so much,
everyone.
Jill and Rebecca.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.